Dress it up, subvert it, deny it all you want. Marriage is an institution that has curtailed women's freedom for centuries. But instead of rejecting the patriarchal and outdated tradition, some feminists have decided to reclaim it.
Let's hear what she has to say and how feminists or others today are reclaiming marriage. Although I think that if somebody does not like the idea of marriage, why would you even want to reclaim it in the first place? The idea of not wanting something is that you no longer want to claim it or have anything to do with it. So reclaiming it just seems very strange to me. But it still offends you. It's like the idea that people who have been called a derogatory term claim they're going to reclaim it and take back the power it holds, yet the word still has power because if anybody else uses it, they still get highly offended to the point of violence. I'm of the idea that if you don't like something or you don't want it having power over you, why reclaim it? Just let it go, let it die, and move as far away from it as possible.
We may have progressed since the Industrial Revolution, where Mary Wollstonecraft described marriage as little more than a state of legal prostitution. But let's not kid ourselves. Even today, marriage is not about equality. It's about perpetuating male privilege. Being given away by your father may seem cute and romantic, but it stems from a time when women were seen literally as their father's and then their husband's property. The majority of brides still opt for a white gown.
Beautiful? Yes, indeed.
But the implication that brides should be virgins is both ludicrous and insulting to women.
I agree with some of those things, as yes, it does stem from those traditional values. I guess I wasn't really traditional because my father didn't exactly give me away. I was in another state, and I told my parents we were getting married. We didn't want a wedding. That was our decision. And much to, I'm sure, the dismay of my mother, who wanted to see that for me, my husband and I got married in front of a judge, just randomly, no other witnesses there. We just got the certification from the judge. It says, you two are now married. That was my husband's decision. He asked me one day, when you want to get married? And I'm like, sure, yeah. My whole reason for getting married was, and mind you, I had a little bit of that in me as well, with the whole, I want to go out there and explore, not people and bodies, gross. Like, go out and do things that you can't do when you're married, because unfortunately, but yet, beautifully, when you're in a relationship with someone, it's no longer just about you. You're now a family unit. For me, traditionally, that's what marriage was about. Yes, I wanted someone to be accountable to, or someone to account for me. I wanted somebody to, and I know it's going to sound strange, but to answer to. It's this really weird thing, and I'm just speaking for myself personally as a female in my own body, but having grown up with a loving father who has, taught me how to be strong and to be kind and all that stuff, I still desire to be a part of something bigger. Even though I am introverted and I like not being around people, I still like the idea of caring for someone and loving someone where I can still be myself, but I can still have someone also be strong and be there for me. Because most of the people or women that I talk to, especially older women, they seem to be very bitter or just done with everything, and they're forced to take care of everything themselves, and because they are doing everything themselves, they have nobody else to depend on. It's like they're wearing all of that stress on their shoulders, and it's not a good look. And I'm like, if that's what your life is like, I do not want to do whatever you did to end up there. And you're kind of jaded taking advice from women like that, because it's like, you're looking at their life and all that it's telling you through their experience and what you can see is that's what you don't want to end up like. I think people look at the very bad aspect of marriage, and that's why a lot of them fail.
That a female who has had sex is somehow spoilt goods goes against everything feminists claim to stand for. I know feminists who've taken their husband's name because they say it's easier. Easier than changing your passport, email address, utilities bills and bank account details, I suppose. You're basically being branded, so anyone who sees your name knows immediately who you belong to.
She's right, and I wear my husband's last name with pride. Yes, I am his freaking cattle, horse, whatever you want to call it. And for me, personally, I'm okay with that because we're a family. And the person, if we had chosen to have children, who would traditionally carry along the bloodline would be the husband. So it makes sense that he has that name. Also, regardless of whether I'm making more or he's making more, he's handling all the bills and stuff, so it's just easier it being under one name and us being one family so things are less confusing. Since he's going to be taking care of us and doing all of that stuff for what's going to be the rest of our lives, the least I can do in the short term is change my information. And that the family carries that name. Males can procreate faster in terms of the amount, I guess, of kids they can have across females. So it made sense back in the day that they would do that, because if they have a lot of children, the man owning a territory, it's much easier since he is the one who is protecting the territory, for he is the one who is contending with other males to protect his children, and he is the one on whom the females rely on resources for them to readily recognize his name rather than her name. It's not a female competing with other females to keep resources so that their men can be provided for. It was the men doing it. And it's very strange. Like, I know a lot of this is based in religion as well, but this isn't wholly something that men decided to just come up with out of the winds. Like, this is something that was biologically established from the tests of time before we had religion and stuff. It's just the way it is. If women were completely able to go out there and contend for territory and completely protect themselves against the advances of males and stuff like that, we wouldn't have this issue. Because men would look at women and be like, wow, I can't go over there and fight that. And there was a reason why men wanted the females, because the females could pop babies out. Men needed them to do that. What did women need men for? Well, they need that thing to be put inside so that they can make the baby thingy. And then, because women relied on men for their strength and protection, not just from other men, but from creatures, men having a much more strapping bone density and musculature, females gravitated towards men who had more females and more resources. I think it's vice versa. Like, the more resources they have, the more strength they have, the more females want to screw them. So, me as a female deer, seeing this buck breeding with a lot of female deer, he's strong, he wins a lot of fights. It means that my children are going to most likely have the genetics to be able to survive and fight off danger and survive. So I want to breed with him. Most of the females are breeding with him must mean he has great genes. That's just the way that females worked. And before there was jealousy and religion, which kind of spoiled a lot of things, that's the way that females thought. It was normal for them. I imagine there being a time when human beings walk the earth and there was no such thing as romance and jewelry and diamonds. I'm sure they had connections, but because traditionally they grew up in a society where, you know, males would just be like, hey, I'm the toughest male, and if he's not, this other male gets him, and they're like, okay, I guess this is the new toughest male. Women would gravitate towards a male that had those qualities because all that mattered was that they were taken care of. Why? So that their offspring could be taken care of. It had nothing to do with romance and being with that one person for the rest of your life. They stayed with that man so long as he provided the resources. And the reason why women have it embedded in them to be hypergamous is because if that man cannot provide for them anymore, they need to have a way to solidify the survival of their offspring. Their offspring, the woman's offspring. She has more kids. She wants to know that those kids are going to have a higher chance of survival. So, of course, that man's going to be too old to take care of her. She's still young enough to breed. Does it make sense for her to stay with that old-ass man who can't take care of her kids and get them resources? The woman also, because I'm not saying that women are weak, but compared to men, they are at a disadvantage when it comes to strength and endurance. It is what it is. We can talk about consequences of that later. with the biology of males and females and how them contesting against each other isn't a great idea for the females. But anyway, so this female and her other females are like, well, it takes way more of us to bring down a deer, and we can build stuff to try and do that, but to be equal physically with a male of our species, we have to do more. It is what it is. And I, being an athlete for most of my life, I had to grow up and be humbled by that fact, because when I was a preteen, and before, I was faster than all the boys. I could wrestle them all to the ground, and this weird thing happened when we all turned 12, 13. All of a sudden, I'm really short, and they're calling me midget. That's what they called us back. That wasn't, weird. Just a few years ago, that wasn't a bad word, but now it is. But that was what they would call me. And I would look up at them, still can run faster than you. And I look at my calves, and I look at their calves, and I'm like, well, damn, where did that come from? Then we go on in track and field, and me, who was, the fastest, all of a sudden, I am doing, 30 strides to keep up with their 10, because their legs are so much longer, and them pushing and leaping forward produces so much more torque. I was upset, but I had to be humbled at the fact that, you know what? Even the other girls around me, there's just no competition. And I was one of the more athletic girls. So it just is what it is. It's that wicked thing called biology and testosterone that males have a lot of. So over time, this whole thing happens where females do the choosing. They say, hey, whoever has the most resources, I want to be with you. And so what does it do? It encourages males to get more resources and to be more competitive with each other, because that's what females want. Females choose. Females do the choosing. I don't know where this thing came from where they're like, men are the ones who are doing... No, it started with females. Yes, there are cases, with mammals and stuff, where males will force themselves on the females, especially if they have that opportunity, like deer and ducks and stuff. There are certain animals, but then there are other higher intelligence animals there where they will choose, they will do the choosing if they're not being forced against their will. And then there's the other thing too, because it's okay, a female gets forced against her will on some other man, she doesn't want to choose him, and another male's like, well, I want that. She can't fight him off herself. And for whatever reason, in those situations, the females do not band together to fight off the males. And even if they all did, it's like watching someone throw these little tiny sandbags around. It's just really weird. You look at a buck and a doe, deer species, and you just see the size discrepancy and the muscle discrepancy, and you're like, there is no way if all 6 doe were on that deer. He has antlers, his muscles are much bigger. All he has to do is breathe on them, and they fall down. So what happens? Females can't fight. They get a male to fight for them. They say, I choose you because you have resources and you're more powerful and you can protect us. And the more females that male has, is the more busy he is. He's getting it on a regular basis, and there's a trade-off happening. It's not like the females aren't getting anything out of it. When people tell these stories about marriage and how females are at a disadvantage, yes, I'm not going to lie, there were a lot of disadvantages. You did not have certain freedoms, especially that women today have. But there was a trade-off for it. You were provided for. You never had to work. All you had to do was keep the place clean, which is supposed to be really simple, and stay home with the kids. And nowadays, females are like, I don't want to have to work. The man should pay for everything. What happened to independence? Well, it's because females don't want to work. It's not a natural thing for females to be standing on their legs all day long working. Our bodies were not designed to do that. And to be frank, I don't think males' bodies were designed to do that either. However, when it comes to endurance, males can hunt and run for hours hunting down something. Can females do it too? Sure, yes, they can. But if you look at the performance statistics of males to females, they can do it for a lot longer and they can do it for a lot better. We can carry children, though. They can't do that. But let's not try to say that, they're less than us, because no, we are strong at different things. A male cannot carry a baby, and males can raise children, but they're not as good at multitasking when it comes to children and emotions and crying and doing this while you're sick. Women are very, very good at that. Weird how we're generally good at the things that we're biologically designed to do. It's weird, right? But this marriage thing, apart from just being a way to control people so that there are not fights and murders because people are sleeping with each other's wives, there's some kind of kibosh of saying that this woman is yours. And I guess they found that with civilization and them trying to progress, it is a lot easier to deal with way less women and children running all over the place and making sure that you put all of your focus into one child and one family because there were more people and they don't have the time to do those primitive competitions. So that made sense. That's where that came from. And females, when they started with that whole thing, they agreed to it. The women could have walked away and been like, see ya, and died for the cause. But they didn't. They wanted that too. We want to belong to something bigger. That is something you notice. That's why a lot more women tend to be a lot more emotionally spiritual and religious, because they want to belong to something outside of themselves. It is just the way that most of us generally are.
Even if a woman does away with all these traditions, accept it. Marriage can never be a feminist act. It has formed the backdrop to women's oppression for centuries. And it continues to do so. Forced marriage, child brides and polygamy all show how human rights violations of women and girls all too often go hand in hand with marriage.
She is very right, and these are very real-world problems, especially in certain countries. But you cannot sit there and use the institution of marriage and compare it to places that use child brides with places like America, where marriage actually nowadays, like at the time this video is made, benefits the woman more than it does the man. It might have had some oppressive qualities with life for like our great-great-grandparents. But today, if you want to walk away from the marriage, you can. The marriage now has changed. It has evolved with progression to the point where females can choose whether or not they want to be married. The males should be able to choose whether or not they want to be married. And honestly speaking, from what I've seen, it becomes more oppressive in nature for the men than it does the women. I find it kind of benefits both if both people go in knowing that they're both protected. Like, you're going in not thinking, what if this person screws me over? Which isn't a great basis for any marriage, to be honest. And the risk with that is not knowing people, like not knowing who it is you're actually with. You're with someone because you love them, but you don't actually know the person. People don't get counseling before they go into these situations. We'll talk more about that later, and why I think there's a lot of divorce. You know, because of people changing and stuff. But yeah, I don't like when people use the argument like, well, look at what's happening with child brides. Yeah, but that's not happening in the UK and the USA. You cannot compare marriage being oppressive there with marriage being oppressive here. That is honestly very disrespectful, because you're basically saying that as someone living in the UK or the USA, you were just as oppressed as someone who's a freaking child bride, like in somewhere in China or somewhere. That's really rude and very entitled and tone deaf. Oh, one other thing. Before marriage was even a thing, that stuff was still happening. If they decided in those countries to do away with marriage, you think that would protect those poor children? It wouldn't. So saying that marriage is the main cause for that? No. Is there an element of truth to it being like a piece of that problem? Sure, but it's not the cause of it. Before marriage was even instituted as a thing, this was still happening. And it sounds disgusting, and we know better now, but because humans lived to be not as long as they do now, even more so in caveman times, they're like, you know what? You can have children now, let's go. And that's how they did it. And it's usually those older men with those resources that did that, because when people are living till they're 30, it's not like you can wait until she's freaking 25. Like, it is what it is. It's disgusting to me, yes. But biologically, I understand why that would happen. Same thing with our dogs and our horses. If they were out in the wild, like, there's a certain age that you don't breed your dog, like usually 2 years old when most people start. But technically, a lot of dogs do come into estrus around, like, 8 months? And they're like, don't breed them because they're not fully developed. And so what would happen? Dogs in the wild, they do breed around that time when they have the chance. And if they're not fully developed and they're not able to carry their babies to term, the babies die and the strongest ones survive. Or the mother dies and the strongest mothers that can carry it to term survive. And so the cycle continues. And that's just the way that natural selection does its thing. Wicked world we live in, but that is the way that the earth functions. And I think when we more so realize stuff like that, we can have better, more mature conversations about certain things, and understand, like, there's a reason why, as civilization progressed, why we made certain laws to protect certain people, because now we know, yes, there is a health problem involved. Now we know, but because of the world that we're living in, where children are dependent longer time on their parents, they're not as developed mentally and physically and all those things, and they could get hurt. But when people were fighting for their lives from tigers and freaking dinosaurs, that was the last thing on their mind. It was all about survival, so people grew up pretty quickly.
It was not until 1991 that rape in marriage was made a criminal offence in England and Wales. And today, it's still perfectly legal for a man to rape his wife in 47 countries worldwide. So if you want to get married, then just get on with it. But please stop pretending that because you're a feminist, it's some kind of subversive statement.
That's always an interesting one to me, and honestly, it's not something I have all the answers to when it comes to, like, forcing yourself upon your significant other. I think a lot of that boils in respect to that person on both sides. You can't be in a marriage and be like, well, now that you married me, we're never having sex again. Like, you can't do that. On the other hand, you can't be like, well, because you won't do this, I'm going to force myself upon you. I always thought, like, maybe it's just my old way of thinking because of how my parents raised me. But if I'm mad at my husband and he's like, I want some, you know, I'm still doing it because that part of our relationship is completely separate from the part of me that's mad at him. Maybe I'm being selfish because I also want sex, but no matter how mad, I'll be like, you know, he's like, well, do you not want to? Well, yeah, of course. Never said anything about that. That has nothing to do with this over here. But there are times where I've heard people use it as like a sort of punishment. My mother used to do it to my father all the time for things that he didn't even do wrong. Like, it's just because he dared to stand up for us when she was being an asshole to us. And now he's on the couch. And I don't, you know, and that whole thing did a part of women starting to become more like aware, not aware, we're not freaking robots, but women starting to have a bit more freedom. Did that also give us some kind of entitlement when it came to how we treat our partners and what we're able to get away with, knowing that they can't easily leave the relationship? You know, not saying I'm excusing someone forcing themselves, but I wonder how much in the old days, like our great-great-grandparents, that was an obligation to keep the marriage healthy, you know, to put aside what you wanted versus what the man wanted and vice versa. Because if sex is the only thing that's like, hey, I'm coming home from a thing at work and I want this, and the wife is like, I don't want this, did the husband also get to say to be like, well, I don't want to go into work and provide for you guys this year or today? And the wife is like, we have bills to pay, we're going to be put out on our ass. And the husband's like, oh, well, you know, when they both came into a relationship, that was the understanding of the trade-off. And then what would happen, not saying I excuse this, but in some cases, the man would see this And he'd be like, well, when I come home and my wife is putting me off, she doesn't want to, so what do I do? Because I am very frustrated, and this is my way as a man to relieve that. Like, we're made up completely different. So he has someone outside that does have the time for that. Now the wife is mad because she hasn't slept with him in 3 weeks, but he's mad that he's going somewhere else to get it. I'm not saying that's the case all the time, because you'll have very good wives and their husbands will still cheat on them. That's disgusting. But then it's like, it's one of those weird things. Like, it's just conversations that we actually have to have. I mean, do we have to have them? Maybe not. But I feel like what is lost in translation oftentimes is how different men or women are based on how they think. Not just traditionally, but biologically. How men are able to compartmentalize things a lot better than women. Man, it's rough. But anyway, let's continue the video.
I love Snoop Dogg, despite his woman-hating lyrics.
Bitches ain't shit but hoes and tricks.
I'm so done. I'm so done with the end. I was not expecting that. What in the hell? Okay.
But I don't pretend that listening to him is a feminist act. And women should stop pretending that marriage is anything other than a tool for their own oppression.
You know, I don't think that men establish marriage as a way to be like, let's oppress our women. Like, I don't think they went into it with that. I mean, I could be wrong. I could be just looking at it from our whole thing with the westernization of our cultures. But yeah, women were used as a tool. Men used women for sex and for children. But most men that had their families, they loved their wife or loved their wives. Like, it's not like they're like, ugh, look at this piece of trash. Like, they need them. They need them for something. And let's not also pretend as though females don't use men for their money, their protection, and resources. I hate how when people make up this argument, it's always one-sided. Like, look at what the men are doing to us. You know, because they're stronger and they're bigger and they're okay, but you also get a benefit from it, though. And I'm not saying that because you get a benefit from something that you should overlook people who are actually legitimately being oppressed. No, we know better now. We're not freaking monkeys anymore. But nowadays, like in our society, in our Western society, with our freaking iPhones and our structures and AC that the men have built, let's not sit here and in our freaking AC spod building that was created by men, fan ourselves and sip our freaking Mai Tais and be like, oh, I'm so oppressed as a woman. Look at what they've done. Mrs. I have the choice whether or not to be married in the UK and United States. Stop. Like, if they really want to go out there and fight oppression, they can go to Saudi Arabia or some of those countries where that is still happening. And by all means, please go to those people out there and go and tell them what they're doing is wrong. If you dare. It's very rich people preaching to the choir here. Like, most men understand that, you know, there are issues with these systems, these very archaic systems. And from what I know, men aren't the one asking women in Western society to marry them. It's the women who want to get married. So the women are choosing to get married because that is their choice. And the men, they give the men an ultimatum and say, well, if you want to stay with me forever, you got to put a ring on it. And the man, to get that, needs to do that. And since most of the relationships, the men are making more money, if something happens and the woman's like, you know what, deuces. Whether she's cheating on him or the other way around, she gets half of what he has and then continues getting that after they're married for how long they were. Like, I don't know. I don't know. This video was made 6 years ago, and I don't know if the laws changed much then. But I think 6 years ago, marriage was still very much, especially in Western society, beneficial and advantageous more so to females than it were males. And this weird thing that females can do, which is choose not to get married. It's crazy, right? So I don't know what she's talking about. The generalization, it's not giving intelligence. unless you're pointing out specific countries. But you cannot sit up here pointing out issues with men in marriage and women in marriage while you're in a UK society, but you're using countries from halfway across the world for your argument. That's not a part of here. Like, I don't understand. And if feminists decide that they want to get married, is it not their right to choose? Like, I thought the whole feminist agenda was we want to be equal to men. But now you've gotten in a situation where you are a little bit higher on the pole for men. You get a little bit more out of a marriage than they do. As a matter of fact, the only benefit I guess a man could have to being married to a woman is that she gets to carry his name. And she doesn't even have to do that. Now you could choose not to do that. I still haven't changed my name yet. I am still Ms. Whoever I was. I still have my father's name. And it's not because I haven't, done it because I don't want to do it. I want to do it. I want to be Mr. So-and-so, my husband's last name. Because I want to be a part of his family. He is the man. He is the head of the household. For me, that is something traditional I have grown up with, and I'm okay with it. But there are some people who are not, and men are okay with that. And the thing is, it's very rich. People want, like girls, a lot of us want a man to wear a ring on his finger. If he goes out there and he takes his ring off, and he walks around, they would be very offended. Because he's not wearing his ring. Why? Does he not want people to know he's married to me? He didn't change his freaking thing on the Facebook, Instagram, whatever, to let people know that he's in a relationship with me. Is he ashamed of me or something? We get very offended over that. Understandably. But yet, these same women are complaining, saying they don't want to take his name because... Why? What is the whole reason behind that? Is it just because you're like, well, this was based in a horrible, oppressive institution, so I don't want people to know I'm married? I just don't get it. It's like they're fighting just to fight. You don't have to, I guess. And I guess, some women are like, well, why can't he take my name? Fair enough. But let me ask you something. When you were born into your family and you understood that your last name was Moreno, right? You were your father's last name. Why did you not have a problem with having your father's last name? Why is it that marriage, you wait until someone approaches you for marriage, so you're like, I'm going to keep my name. The name you're keeping is your father's name through marriage. And your mother's name is her father's name through her marriage. So how far back do we really want to go here? And how much of this really actually matters in the big scheme of things? The thing is, women can still choose to keep their names if they want to, I guess. But will men be allowed to not have to wear their rings? The ring is also a very traditional symbol of the man being committed to a woman with whom he is married. So if you do not want to take the man's last name, that is completely fine. Don't expect him to wear his wedding band. Because you can't choose to have your side of the very traditional value just washed away, but he needs to keep his. It's kind of like that whole thing with women saying, oh, because we're feminists now, we're independent and we want to be treated equally, but we don't want to ever pay for our own stuff. What? The double standard is just so hilarious to me. So while I agree in some part with what this woman is saying, her arguments are kind of invalid in areas because there is a double standard going on. And I don't think that she's making this argument in total honesty because she's acting or coming from the angle as though women nowadays don't have the right to choose marriage. How can marriage be oppressive if you can choose to not be a part of it? And how can a feminist not be a feminist when she gets married if she is choosing to be in something that you consider oppressive? It's kind of like those people also who are into bondage. You can say that bondage is oppressive, But if, as a feminist, they're like, that's my kink and I'm into that. I want someone to put a choke collar around me and make me bark like a dog. That is something I am into. I have the right to choose to want that. Is it not their right to exercise their need to want to be oppressed sometimes because it's their kink? So here, topsy-turvy we go with that whole, hey, you're not a real feminist if you're exercising your right to choose to do things, which is very confusing. So are you a feminist or are you not? And if somebody else is a feminist, but they're now exercising that choice to be independent and make choices that they want and reclaim it, as you say, then why are you being oppressive towards them and telling them that they're not real feminists if they choose to do that? You see what I'm talking about? You see where I'm going with this?
Anyway, as the late human rights lawyer Paula Ettelbrick said, marriage is a great institution, if you like living in institutions.
All right, well, I like living in institutions. There you go. I don't even understand what the whole point of this video was. Like, I mean, I get it. She's probably expressing her opinion. Thanks a lot, Thoughty2. That was very nice. The thing is, nowadays, people can do whatever they want. Marriage for people in the UK and the Western society is not oppressive, as it is in other countries. That is where the real work needs to be done. Why don't you go over there and take your privilege and go and make a difference somewhere where it needs to be made, instead of being on the internet talking about how it's terrible and oppressive to an audience who is no longer oppressed by it. These people are so weird. They say stuff like this, but yet they still celebrate institutions, or not institutions, but like holidays like Christmas. You know, given the whole, you know, people who are not into pagans or Christians, you can go back as far as you want for it to mean what you want it to mean. But you will still do that and say things along the line of, well, it doesn't mean what it did hundreds of years ago. So now we only celebrate these parts of it. We've cherry-picked the parts that we like so we can continue making it fun. You can do stuff like that, but with marriage, it's not okay. Anyways, what do you guys think? The last thing I want to say about that is, like, you know, I mean, maybe I'll make another video about that, but, the whole submissive thing, like, a large part of marriage is, yeah, you do have to submit to someone. A lot of it does have to do with some kind of, or elements of traditional values, and I don't know why that's such a threatening thing to some people. There are some people who want to have those traditional values. They want to feel as though they're taken care of by someone. And the great thing is you can still be married to someone nowadays and still be yourself and still do things that you like to do. But yes, if you're talking about oppression on a scale of outside of having the person's last name, not being able to do whatever the hell you want to do, then, yeah, if you're part of a family unit and a pack, you want the man to do all the providing for. So yes, things are going to fall under his name. You don't want to take his name, fine, whatever. But you still have to be accountable to someone. And just like with him, you know, he wants to know where you are at 3 o'clock in the morning to know if you're safe. You know, you want him to know, or you want to know where he is at 3 o'clock in the morning. And if that's not something that is important to you, then you need to find someone who's on your level. And both of you have to have your own thing going on where both of you agree and say, I don't want you checking in with me at all hours of the night, which is weird because women will say that, but then when men don't care about them or act as though, you know, they're not interested in their whereabouts, all of a sudden, you never care about me or ask about my well-being, this person over here does, so I'm gonna fuck him instead. And it's like, them giving you what you want is making you not want them. It's just a whole thing. I just thought it was so freaking silly. And I've seen so many videos like the one that we just looked at, and it just baffles me. I don't even know what, like, I feel like feminists today are just fighting to fight, and they're not actual real feminists. They don't want actual equality. Whenever it holds them accountable or requires them to take some ounce of responsibility as to the entitlement of their situation in modern times, it goes out the window. They completely ignore that part and put all of it on the opposite sex, which is very dishonest. Thanks for stopping by. I guess I'll see you guys in the next video.